Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Johnny Hunt, Senior Vice President of Evangelism and Leadership, North American Mission Board. At North American Mission Board, everything we do is about the gospel. 2 years ago, this week, we gathered in Birmingham and we challenged each of those that were in attendance to identify just one person that you would consider as your one. And the one whom you committed to pray for and to share Jesus with. On that single day, 3,000 of you committed to share Jesus with one. This God-ordained effort and your evangelistic passion has sparked a movement across North America. I could not be more excited by the results and the lives that are being changed for all eternity. Today, we have 12 times as many, nearly 40,000 people all across America praying, sharing, and leading people to Christ. Big churches, small churches, traditional worship, rock and roll music, churches and pastors across our denomination have heeded the call to lead their one to Christ. Our tours have drawn thousands of attendants, and practical equipping have led many of our people. Over 13,000 have attended the Sunday night Who's Your One rallies, and 5,000 have attended the Monday morning trainings. We've hosted 27 tour stops across the country with more scheduled this fall. So I'm grateful to God for a small part in this big effort. Now I want to ask those of you that are sitting in this room, have you identified your one? Have you been praying for one and sharing with them? If not, you can begin today. If you'd be willing to take out your mobile and text ONE, O-N-E, to 888-123, you'll receive a link, and in return, you can add their first name and their city to be your one that you're praying for, and asking God, by the grace of God, over these next 12 months, that you'd lead them to faith in Christ. We saw gospel conversations played out in the streets of Nashville this past weekend. 92 people knocked on doors across this community, 6,300 gospel conversations, and the good news of these 40 churches that participated with us, 176 people prayed to receive Christ as their personal Lord and Savior. And we thank God for every one of them. This is what it takes: personal conviction, personal engagement, personal conversation, and that's the heart of our Great Commission. What was incredible was the number of young people that engaged in the crossover this year. So I want you to take a moment and take a look at a video report of the work from this past weekend.
Why do this? Why give up a week of summer break? Why go door to door and talk to strangers? Why come to a place where it seems like there's already a church on every corner and do crossover? When I say crossover, I'm talking about this. And when I say we, I'm talking about us, students from all over the country. And I'm talking about students because, believe it or not, crossover isn't just for adults. Crossover is the church, and we are the church. Not the church tomorrow, but the church right now. And that's why we hit the streets in the neighborhoods of Nashville. That's why we put into practice all those things we've learned at church and college and seminary. And that's why we want you to see this, because young people reaching strangers with the gospel is not some one-time event. Right now, there are churches full of people just like us that are coming up with new ways to reach more students. Those churches are baptizing new believers like never before. And NAMB is focusing attention and resources to give churches like yours and young people like us everything we need to do the same. And that's how God is using us, and will use us, to build His church. And that's how crossover, that thing that happened here in Nashville last week, as great as it was, it's just a small piece of a way bigger gospel picture. If somebody asks, that's what we tell them. It's all about the gospel. That is why we do this.
One of the great joys of serving in the position that I'm in now is the privilege to work with our state directors of evangelism across America. Today on the platform, I want to introduce to you one of my very good friends, Rock Collins, Tennessee Baptist Convention, State Director of Evangelism.
Thank you, Brother Johnny. Thank you, Southern Baptists, for coming to Tennessee. We are so grateful for the crossover event and the lostness that was impacted with the good news of Jesus Christ. Tennessee is approaching 7 million residents, and we're quickly approaching 4 million that do not know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. We're glad you're here. We want you to help us impact Tennessee for Jesus Christ. And we're already hearing rumblings across the state from Memphis to Mountain City and Clarksville to Fayetteville and all points in between that people are being saved, coming to faith in Christ, following him in baptism, and beginning on their road to discipleship. And we rejoice in what's happening in Tennessee, and we're praying that it will overflow all across our Southern Baptist Convention. Thank you for being here and for impacting Tennessee for Jesus Christ.
Thank you, Rock. We're grateful for the Tennessee Baptist Convention and for the seminaries bringing students to participate in crossover. And we're grateful for the churches who hosted Who's Your One Sunday in an effort to reach people with the hope of the gospel. Many of those, of the 176, gave their life to Christ in one of our local churches this past Sunday. The research is very clear. Every generation is less likely to attend church than their parents did. Students are finding life meaning and purpose outside of Jesus. And what's really heartbreaking is that a Barna study from 2019 says that nearly half, 47% of Christian millennials believe evangelism is actually morally wrong. Student leaders, local churches are on the front lines in this mission. That's why the North American Mission Board is investing $5 million over the next 4 years for student evangelism. State conventions will be able to leverage their resources and additional investments for the North American Mission Board to tailor and target what is needed in different regions of North America. And NAMB will provide national messaging, people, events, and resources as comprehensive support for this effort. So as part of our focus on student evangelism, we're excited about the future of collegiate evangelism given this morning's vote. So NAMB has requested and been granted the collegiate ministry assignment. Paul Worcester, our team, are excited about the opportunity to serve pastors, collegiate leaders, and students across the nation. So we believe college campuses are incredibly strategic mission fields in our nation. Listen carefully. There are 21 million college students in North America, and the average college campus across our nation is only 5% reached. It's important that we reach this generation and equip them to be the generation of leaders in the church. So yesterday during our collegiate and student Send Conference track, students packed 2,800 backpacks for Send Relief. They wrote hundreds of prayer cards for church planners and missionaries. But here's the most exciting part. 20 of those students in that particular track surrendered their life to Jesus Christ in faith. So God is at work among our students. Let me give a personal challenge to every pastor in this room. Pastor, there's a lot you can delegate to your staff, but we cannot delegate evangelism. We must lead out as pastors. Join me in doing just that. You ask us for resources. If you'll go to namb.net/evangelism, you'll find there, offered free to your church, 3 Circles kit by Jimmy Scroggins, Best News kit, James Merritt, Live This kit, John Metters, Who's Your One Everyday Evangelism resource that's extremely popular, all for your asking. I joined the North American Mission Board 2 years ago, and I've found evangelism to be at the very heart of everything we do. For 43 years, I was on the outside, a pastor of a Southern Baptist church looking in. Really, the truth is, for the last 2.5 years, I've been on the inside, and I'm grateful to God for the Christ-honoring leadership of our president, Kevin Ezell. Whether it is through sin relief, sin network, evangelism, pastoral leadership, it's all about the gospel. That concludes my report for crossover and evangelism.
Thank you, Pastor Johnny. The chair at this point recognizes Kevin Ezell, president of the North American Mission Board, for a report.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the distinct honors of my life is to be able to go to work and serve every day with that man, Johnny Hunt. I saw him as a pastor and now having the opportunity to watch him on a day-to-day basis. It's just incredible to watch his passion to reach people for Christ. And I'm so grateful for his tireless effort. At the North American Mission Board, everything we do is about the gospel. The gospel is preeminent, and the gospel unites. For the last 10 years, we've laid out a single, simple vision. Plant churches to reach broken people. That's Sin Network. To meet needs and change lives. That's Sin Relief. And restore our neighbors through the power of the gospel. That's evangelism. That remains our focus today and every day. The gospel unites, convicts us, compels us to move forward, and it's working. This map shows the number of church plants that we had, Southern Baptist had in 2010. Each dot represents a church plant. But by the grace of God and the faithful giving of Southern Baptist, this is what that map looks like today. In the last decade, Southern Baptists have planted more than 8,200 churches. Those churches make up nearly 17% of all churches across the SBC, and outside the South, church plants represent nearly 19% of all reported baptisms. In Canada, 54% of all current Southern Baptist churches were planted since 2010. And these churches are responsible for more than half of the baptisms in Canada. Churches are planting healthy churches with a heart for multiplication and churches that have a vision to transform cities. But what I want you to see, it is all about one. Every dot, every one of those dots, not only a church, but inside that church, every dot represents a face. In Puerto Rico, Southern Baptists have planted 16 churches since 2016. This is a place where no Southern Baptist churches were planted in some 20 years. In New England, church planter Aaron Cavan moved to Boston 10 years ago with a vision for multiplication. Now, they're not just planting churches for New Englanders, they're planting churches with New Englanders. In Canada, La Chapelle in Montreal, Quebec, baptized 17 people in April of this year. Since David Potier started that church in 2013, they have baptized 649 people. And they have partnered with NAMB to plant 4 churches so far, with one more coming soon. I say all that to say it's working. There is a compelling need, but the need is as great today, if not greater, than it was a decade ago. Clearly, there is more work to be done. But let's remember, NAMB doesn't plant churches. Churches plant churches. In church planting, our biggest challenge today is the need for more qualified church planters. That's why we want to make sure our churches and pastors are best equipped to take the gospel everywhere for everyone. To that end, NAMB is adding a resource and research initiative to pull together some of the best thinking about missions work, church planting, and discipleship in an ecosystem of free materials centered around the needs of current and up-and-coming pastors and church planners. We can and will, with efforts like this, to work to equip planters, but the bottom line is that planters come from churches. They come from big churches. They come from small churches. They come from urban centers, suburbia, and small towns. They come from pastors like Kevin Lund at Risen Life Church in Salt Lake City. They planted multiple times, sent out core teams from 350 members. They come from men like Tim Moore at Cross Country Cowboy Church in Mount Vernon, Washington. They come from Hayden Radner at Walk Church in Las Vegas. It's always Vegas. A church that plants churches who, even in the midst of COVID, planted Image Church. These are people and churches who perhaps you've never heard about, you may never see on the news, or never hear them preach. But God is using them to spread the gospel through church planting. Planting isn't just for mega churches and big name pastors, so to speak. Planting is for every church, every pastor in North America. The first and most important thing that we ask you to do is to pray. Every pastor in this room, every church represented in this room can pray. Will you pray for a church planter? Will you commit to being a prayer warrior for the men and their families who are sharing the gospel in some of the toughest places? You can connect with our church planners today by simply text PRAY right now to 888-123. Pray, P-R-A-Y, 888-123. You'll be amazed at what God will do in you and through you as your church and you partner in prayer for a planter. No matter what happens, Christ calls us to persevere. Through some of the most trying times for our world in recent memory, your North American Mission Board missionaries, church planners, chaplains, evangelists, and staff remain focused every day on sharing the gospel across our continent. Thanks to your strong support and resilient focus of our church planners, we succeeded in planting 588 churches in a COVID year of 2020. In addition, 143 churches affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention and 126 new church campuses were started, for a total of 857 new congregations were added in the SBC in 2020. In a year where we were told to distance and not gather, it's obvious you did not obey the law. "60% of the SBC churches that were planted in 2020 were ethnic and multi-ethnic congregations. We are truly a diverse family of new churches. And at Send Network, we've translated all of our church-planted related resources and materials into Spanish, contextualizing them to better serve our Hispanic brothers and sisters. Churches plant churches, and our focus is less about yearly counts, quite honest. It's more about equipping those churches planted to start strong, evangelistic, healthy churches. And right now, 80% of our churches are still active after 4 years. That's the target. This would not be possible without the faithfulness of Southern Baptists, with both our missionaries and as we start churches in places where the gospel is desperately needed. NAMB is doing everything we can to help those on the front lines. And pastors, that includes you. You are on the front lines in amazing missions work. You're leading the charge. That's why you are our #1 customer. This year has taken a toll on many of you. And NAMB's Next Step Leader, a free resource we're launching later this year, will help you as you lead your church in the most important task of reaching the community and the world. Ultimately, we couldn't be serving pastors and missionaries in this way without the incredible generous giving of millions of faithful Southern Baptists, over 47,000 Great Commission-minded churches. I want to say on behalf of thousands of our missionaries, COVID hit directly on the Annie Armstrong Easter offering last year. In the midst of a time where the majority of our churches were not allowed to meet, Southern Baptists gave $49.5 million to the Annie Armstrong Easter offering. Because of that steadfast giving, we were able to keep every missionary on the field proclaiming the gospel everywhere for everyone. You know, it's all about one. We say all of this when we talk about church planning and sin network and sin relief. It really comes down to one. The power of one. One ministry opportunity, one church plant, the power of one witnessing opportunity. One. The difference one makes. Right now, I want to share a final story with you about how God used a horrific event to change lives and how the power of that story still reverberates today. And God's grace through the demonstration of what He can do with one.
Growing up in this neighborhood was just a wonderful childhood. It really was, until that day. It was a Friday, the last school day of the week, and when I got off the bus, here was this gentleman coming at me, and he said, "Hey, I'm throwing a party for your dad, and by any chance, would you be willing to help me with some of the decorations?" He had an RV. I put my things down in the seat behind the door, hopped in the passenger seat. But once we had left town, once we were out in the middle of nowhere, he pulled me away from the window into the middle of the RV, forced me basically onto my back, looking up at him, and began to stab me in the chest. He literally stood back up and said, "Son, I'm going to take you somewhere, and I'm going to drop you off." We turned left onto this old caliche country road, what we affectionately call Alligator Alley. He stopped the RV and he pointed at a tree. He said, "Why don't you sit down over there by the tree?" And while I was looking down, he must have pulled the gun that I had seen the outlines of in his pocket, and he aimed it right at my left temple. That was the last thing I remembered. When I woke up 6 days later, I remember my dad flat out told me, he said, "Chris, you were kidnapped, you were shot through the head, and you were left to die in the Florida Everglades, and you were missing for 6 days." It was a very tough moment to see this new normal that I was going to have to contend with. I don't know exactly what the trigger was, but that transformation began to happen in me, in which I realized if God protected me from being left to die in the Everglades, well, he's earned my trust. I received a phone call. It's Major Scherer from the Coral Gables Police, and he told me, he said, one of our old chiefs had come across David McAllister in a nursing home in North Miami. Would you like to go meet with him face to face? Because if you would, I can make those arrangements. This is the definition of awkward. What do you say to a guy who the last time you saw him put a bullet through your head? I sat down and I told him, I said, "Mr. McAllister, I'd like you to know what's really been kind of the source of my strength through all of this." We prayed together and we walked through that. And praise the Lord, I think that week of visiting him left an impression on him. And so I shared the gospel as best I could. It was just a beautiful, surreal moment of just being able to say, "Mr. McAllister, I want you to know There's nothing between you and me except our newfound friendship. I want you to know I forgive you. And Mr. McAllister, blind as he was and weak, rolled over in that bed, grabbed my hand as if he could have seen it, and through the tears and the difficulty said, "I'm sorry." And like the thief on the cross next to Jesus, only had one opportunity, and he took advantage of it and prayed to receive Christ. So did David McAllister.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Chris Carrier, if you would. Chris, thank you so much for allowing us to share your story. Second, thank you for wearing the sweater vest. I very much appreciate that. But Chris, listening to your story, would you share with the people about the grace of God, like once you came to know Christ, and how that helped you deal with, we first talked, I said tragedy, and you said it was a tragedy for my parents, but actually it was something God used to form me, and the grace of God walked me through that. How did God walk you through that challenge?
Kevin, I think that through the love of family, the overwhelming support of the church community in South Florida, and even all of the fears and the anxieties, God used all of those to draw me into the gospel. And the encouragement of friends who would say, tell the story of God's miracles in your life, enabled me to see that experience outside of first person and what God was doing.
And I know you had a friend tell you, say, the best thing you could do, Chris, is just tell your story. It'll be part of the healing. And as you told that story over and over and over again, one question was typically always asked, like, what would you say to him if you could talk to them? And you share that how that kind of almost really prepared you for when you got a phone call 22 years later from the sheriff's department saying, would you like to talk? I mean, what went through your mind when you get a call that you actually can do that?
I think there was a moment of laughter thinking, God, you set me up. To know that he had used all of those questions to sanctify my heart for such a reunion.
Right. Well, what was it like as you visited him several times, but ultimately you shared the gospel with him? And what's it like to lead the man who shot you to Christ when he prayed to receive Christ? I mean, what's that like?
Awkward. It was simply two men in the awkwardness of our reunion and newfound friendship, seeking the grace and the presence of God in that room.
Well, that's incredible. Well, thank you for sharing your story. It's an amazing story of grace and faithfulness of what one can do. We're grateful for you, brother. We really are. So, Mr. President, that concludes our report, and stand ready to answer any questions that you might have.
Wow, Kevin, thank you so much. If there are any questions for Kevin Ezell and the North American Mission Board, now is the time. 4A.
Yes, Dr. Ezell. My name is Joey Huffstadler. I'm the senior pastor and messenger from Poplar Grove Baptist Church outside of Trenton, Tennessee. First of all, great report. I've been a supporter of missions my whole life. And just several months ago, I began to hear someone saying some things that didn't paint the North American Mission Board in the greatest light. So I set out to disprove him. That turned out to be harder than I thought it would be. Roman numeral 14, paragraph 2 of our governing documents, business and financial plan, says members of cooperating Southern Baptist churches shall have access to information from the records of Southern Baptist Convention entities regarding income, expenditures, debts, reserves, operating balances, and salary structures. I spent the better part of 3 months requesting the salary structure for the North American Mission Board from trustees, and have yet to receive that information and have been told I should ask that question from the floor. So here I am asking, will you abide with our business and financial plan and allow me to see the salary structure? And if so, when can we set that up?
Yes, sir. Appreciate you asking that question. Our staff has spent many hours talking with you, our chairman of trustees, our chairman of our finance committee. We do provide our structures. But when it comes to something salary related, Mr. President, I'd like to defer to my chairman of our trustees so he can speak directly to this messenger. This is Eric Thomas.
Thank you, Dr. Ezell. I appreciate the question, and as Board of Trustees, we are very excited always to communicate as much as we possibly can to the Southern Baptist Convention, and we're excited to talk about this. Kevin's report to the convention marks a wonderful picture of what North American Mission Board is about. When it comes to salaries and salary structure, though, the Board of Trustees has set up a compensation committee that oversees compensation matters at our board. The board engages a reputable third-party firm that assists in establishing all compensation ranges at the North American Mission Board, and the compensation is well within the ranges identified by the Philip Blunt and Associates group. The board has established the North American Mission Board, the Board of Trustees, has established appropriate procedures for limited access to compensation information, and we will respond to any questions for such information on a case-by-case basis. Now, Dr. Ezell would probably, he's going to hit me or something when I say this, but let me be very clear. Dr. Ezell has not taken a salary increase since 2018. He has refused to take that salary increase since 2018. And when Kevin first came to the North American Mission Board, his salary was merely 5% more than what he made at the church that he pastored at the time. Dr. Ezell is a tremendous model of faithfulness when it comes to stewardship and that matter.
2A. Question on 2A.
David Van Beber from First Baptist Buffalo. Thank you, Dr. Ezell, so much for your report. My question is rather simple. How is the North American Mission Board training church planners to obey the Great Commission by teaching the nations to obey Christ, specifically regarding the immediate abolition of abortion without exception or compromise? And I have a follow-up.
All of our church planners go through an assessment, a very rigorous assessment, and then they are to go through training, and we have an ongoing coaching of all of our planners for 2 years. It goes through theology, it goes through ministry, and obviously application into church planning.
Specifically, could you speak to the material that you're providing regarding the immediate abolition of abortion without exception or compromise?
Specific information on our training and our coaching to have something specific for abortion. We do not have specific information or specific material that we go over.
Would you not agree that it is a gospel issue?
Well, I'm absolutely against abortion, absolutely. And
For the immediate abolition of abortion without exception or compromise?
We've just not had that as an issue with our church planners. As they go through the rigorous assessment of what they believe about the Baptist faith and message, that has not been an issue that I'm aware of. Unless, if you have one, I'd love to discuss
Thank you.
it.
Thank you, brother, for your question. We're going to go to a different question now, and we appreciate that. Microphone number 6.
Thank you.
6A.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Dr. Ezell. I had a question about the finances and the accounting. Between 2017 and 2020, we spent roughly $600,000 lobbying the federal government. How much were you awarded by the federal government, and where can we find that in the financials?
Can you repeat the
Yes.
the numbers?
No problem. So and my name's John Bullock, the Island Chapel, Tierra Verde, Florida. Between 2017 and 2020, Send Relief specifically lobbied for spent $600,000 lobbying the federal government. How much were we awarded by the federal government, and is there a way we can find out how much it was, or is it reported anywhere for Southern Baptists?
Sure, we'd be glad to give you that number. That number is not correct on the 600,000. We engaged a firm that would help us supply more disaster relief materials to our state partners, and so that happened. And then we also have a relationship, obviously, with Puerto Rico and the different administrations. It varies, but we can give you that. To have offhand what we spent specifically on that, it was. I just have to go back and find that. I don't have that with me.
I think it's $590,000.
All right, I'll be glad to check that out and respond.
That concludes our time for the North American Mission Board report, our allotted time. And so thank you, Dr. Ezell, for your report and for the good work. And